and one of the world's most expensive and exclusive shopping avenues. Well, today I'm going to be talking about monetary issues, the money involved in bringing 10 students and 2 chaperones to and around India for 2 weeks. First of all, the basic cost for the trip is $3,300. This is actually an average cost for most of the short-term study abroad trips at Carthage at my college, and it's kind of right in the average amount. There are some trips that go for as low as about $2,000 or $2,200, and there are some that are a bit higher than that as well. But I would say most of the trips are right around the cost of $3,300. When the students express interest in going as part of this program and then fill out the application and they're accepted, they begin by putting down a deposit in May to the business office at our college, and then the bulk of the balance of the amount is due about September 1st, and so we have an account set up in the business office. Now this year is tricky because the original cost of the trip was actually fairly low by the standards of our short-term study abroad programs. The original cost that I had predicted was about $2,600. The last time that we had gone, it was about, I would say it ended up being around $2,400. And so $2,600 I felt was a pretty good, a little bit of an extra contingency there. That transatlantic flight just destroyed our budget. And as the summer wore on, and as I made a video about this, as the summer wore on and as I continued to recognize the just ballooning cost of transatlantic travel, I did have to add on considerable cost to the total of the trip. And I'm really grateful that 10 students actually stuck with me through all of those changes. Having a $700 increase is substantial, and I did in fact lose some students over the extra cost. They said they would love to go, but their family could not allow for that extra expense, and I totally understand that. Even the students that are going, I think it is a substantial extra cost that for some families would be really restrictive and difficult to achieve. So I really appreciate those students sticking with me and stretching their budget in that way. It was unexpected and there's just really no help for it. But as a result, I'm very cognizant of the sacrifice that my students and their families are making to afford this trip. And so my husband and I are actually going to be treating them to a few different things, some of the higher cost meals, a fancy dinner at a palace hotel in Varanasi, and that will be one of our last dinners together as a group, and my husband and I will cover that cost. And then also we'll cover the cost of maybe some excursion. I'm thinking right now we'll probably cover the cost of, we're doing a street food tour, and just to alleviate some of the costs for the students. Even a very expensive meal by Indian standards is maybe an average cost of a meal dining out in the United States. So it's not that difficult for us to treat the students, once in a while, just to alleviate some of the stress and take some of the edge off of that excess cost that they're paying this year. So what is covered in the cost of $3,300? Well, it turns out the total is more like $3,100, maybe $3,050, somewhere in there. But we do have to always include a little bit of a contingency just in case something comes up. For example, our flight gets canceled from Varanasi back to Delhi and we have to quick hire a rental bus or something like that. We would have to have the money in the funds to allow ourselves to do that. So we always have a little bit of a contingency. We don't plan to spend every dollar. And whatever's left at the end, of course, the students will be able to get back. So what is covered in the $3,100 or whatever it actually is? All transport, including the transatlantic flight, of course, and all in-country transport, including buses, trains, and planes that we're taking in-country. And some of the taxis and metro cards and things like that. Students will actually be covering some of their own costs when it comes to transportation. For example, every time a student wanted to take a tuk-tuk to the spice market or a rickshaw to a museum that they're interested in visiting, and the rest of us aren't going, that's not really something that we would be covering. It's usually only about 200 rupees or maybe $2.50, something like that. So usually students can cover that out of their own funds. So speaking of, the students are given, so we cover all transport other than those incidentals, plus students are actually given walking around money, which should last them for about 2 weeks. The last time we went, I would say a good half of the students actually completely ran out of money by the end, but there was a good portion of them who actually had a little bit of money left over at the end of the 2 weeks. So the money that we give them, it's all part of the same fund. It's all part of that $3,100. We basically give them cash that then they have to play with. You know, they can figure out how a currency exchange works, how rupees work. They should be buying their own snacks, their own bottles of water, chips, candy bars, Cokes, things like that. They will sometimes be paying for their own rickshaw rides, any kind of an entrance to something that they themselves want to go see that the rest of us aren't going to. Any kind of clothing purchases should be covered by this money, and any kind of gifts that they're bringing back, as long as they're not excessive. Okay, so that portion of money that is allotted to each student for walking around money is a portion of the money that they originally contribute to the account. The fund also covers all hotel costs and the sleeper train. Most meals are covered by the funds as well. Most meals, I will say that sometimes we separate off midday for students to go and explore different areas of a city, for example. They are meant to stay in groups, but they can go off as long as there's 2 or 3 of them together. They can go off and explore something else, but in that case, if they were to stop for lunch, of course, that would be their own cost. I would say lunches oftentimes are covered separately by students, but breakfast, we try to have breakfast together every day, and then we also definitely sit down for dinner together every night. That is very important. So all of those meals are covered in the budget. So any kind of excursions that we're going to, for example, the Red Fort in Delhi, Humayun's tomb, the Gandhi Museum, I don't think there's actually a cost for that museum, the Taj Mahal, of course, the Sarnath in close to Varanasi. There are some temples that we're going to be taking tours of where there is a requested donation to go to the temple. But there are advanced costs that students have to account for prior to leaving. I would say if I'm adding them all together, I'm going to say the very minimum that students would have to budget for advanced costs would be at least $300 and maybe up to $1,000. It really just depends on the way that a student travels. So for example, there are vaccinations that we recommend that students get, and sometimes the vaccinations are not covered by insurance. I myself had to pay $80 recently for a vaccination. It was my typhoid update that I really needed, and I still had to pay out of pocket for a portion of it anyway. Students do need to have a passport, so if they don't already have a passport, they have to go and order one. I think it's been a little while. I think the American passport is like $110, but it's worth it, in my opinion, just to go ahead and get all the paperwork done at the post office and get the picture taken, because then you're more assured that it's going to be done properly and that the picture is going to come out right and that everything will be filed correctly. And that costs a little bit of extra money. I would say the total cost might be $130, $140 to get all of that done. Because we require our students to do carry-on, oftentimes they will have to purchase luggage in order to actually pack for the trip, because oftentimes people will have luggage that they've already purchased that is only allowed for check-through, but we require them to take carry-on only. And so sometimes they have to actually purchase luggage in order to go. And so that could be, luggage could be a very, very widely varying cost. I've seen students pack all of their things into a simple backpack that they probably already owned, but I've also seen students pay hundreds of dollars to get a nice carry-on bag. Well, the hope is that they continue to travel and that they continue to use that bag in the future, but oftentimes they will have that startup cost specifically for this trip. And then, of course, any gadgets. A student who is not used to traveling may not actually know all the gadgets that they need to fly, so they might end up with like a neck pillow and earplugs and sleeping mask and all kinds of gadgets. There's no end to the gadgets that can make you more comfortable on an airplane. And for very long flights, especially if you've never taken one before, you may want to go out and buy all the things. Of course, you'll probably whittle down that list quite a lot once you become a more seasoned traveler. But at the same time, even a seasoned traveler may sometimes still have to purchase some of those things if they've misplaced them in between trips, for example. Now, the way that our trip begins is we actually meet directly at O'Hare Airport, and so everybody has to arrange their own transport to the airport. For my husband and myself, it would be my sister is actually taking us there, but we might have to get an Uber when we come back. And for us, that's about $50. That's we live about 30 minutes from O'Hare. So the last time we took an Uber to the airport, I think it was like $55. I don't know what it would be now. It's been years, so we'll see. So that would be a substantial cost if you do have to get an Uber. We live relatively close to the airport, but some people live much further away. As far as I can tell, a lot of students actually have their family drop them off, but that's still, the gas cost and parking the car and paying for parking and so on. So that's, it's an added cost. It's something to consider. This year we have required our students to purchase travel insurance. They purchased CFAR insurance. Cancel for any reason, CFAR insurance, so that, or they don't have to purchase it, but a lot of them did. So if they don't purchase the insurance, they're required to sign a waiver saying they understand that they may, who knows why, but they may lose their trip funds. They may not be able to go on the trip, or the trip might get canceled, and then they would not be able to be reimbursed for that. But a number of students actually did go ahead and purchase it, and I think it cost between $170 and like $220, maybe depending on the company, or maybe depending on the level of, I don't actually know. I haven't purchased it myself. And lastly, some students might spend a lot of money on souvenirs and gifts and things like that. Most gifts and standard souvenirs in India are really, really inexpensive, but there are always opportunities to spend hundreds of dollars. So don't get me wrong, we are considering going to a carpet store or rug store and purchasing a nice rug for our house. And some of our students might want to do that as well. There is the opportunity to buy a tailor-made suit. This would be hundreds of dollars, or a really nice piece of tailored clothing items. They would be more expensive. Or there's opportunities to purchase marble chess sets. Like, there's just some things that are really, really expensive. A lot of times you can purchase them and then the store will send them to your home in the US. And also this year we have a bonus country. What is the name of that street in Zurich? We're actually able to leave the airport, do a quick train ride to downtown Zurich to the Bahnhofstrasse. The Bahnhofstrasse is Zurich's main downtown street and one of the world's most expensive and exclusive shopping avenues. Well, so if somebody wants to purchase a Swiss watch or a really nice box of chocolates or something, they may want to bring a credit card, I guess. So now that I've kind of covered what things cost, what some of the advanced costs might be, students contribute money to a fund that is held in the business office at our school, the next question becomes, how do I actually get a hold of those funds to buy stuff for the students? And that's a bit of a tricky topic. That's a bit tricky because the 3 years ago when I went, I had a P card. What is that called? A purchasing card? A procurement card? A P card was associated with a bank that the college used. And then what I did was, it was just a credit card. I was able to use it to purchase things. And then when the statement came in, I would go into the bank's website, I think it was, and I would justify all of the line expenses. And I'd have to find like the accounting code. And I was always getting it wrong. I'm not an accountant. It's not a comfortable experience for me. It's not the easiest thing for me to justify expenses or to figure out exactly how that goes. So this time around, they actually switched to a different bank. So I did have the option to apply for another P card, but I just really disliked the experience very much. So I wanted to try something different. I actually just purchased everything myself, and then I asked for reimbursement from the college. I didn't know how it was going to work, but I'm really, really happy that I did it this way. It's been working out great so far. So my first big purchase was about $23,000 for the airfare. That was the first purchase. And I basically took a credit card and put it on my credit card, got it reimbursed very quickly. There wasn't anything tricky there. So that was the first reimbursement I got. I probably got it back within a week, which was really nice because that's a lot of money to go on a credit card. So that went very smoothly. So I basically submit an expense report to the business office at the school. They take it out of the account and then they reimburse me directly into my checking account. Now, and then of course, in that case, I paid the credit card off really quick. There's basically what what I've learned, what I've garnered about how to submit an expense report is they're looking for three things. They're looking for a receipt, of course. You need a receipt saying, this is how much the thing cost and it was purchased. You need to prove that you yourself actually purchased it. So for this, I would take a screenshot of my credit card statement, or I would take a screenshot of my bank account statement, for example, depending on how I paid for things. And then I would submit a screenshot, and that actually worked, just basically to prove that it came out of my bank account. And then the third thing is the proof that I actually got the thing. So for airfare, it would just be the ticket numbers, basically a series of 12 ticket numbers saying, on this airline, here's our 12 ticket numbers. So some kind of proof like that. Well, I learned a lot. So for example, one time I submitted a screenshot of my credit card statement, but it turns out it was still a pending charge. And they said, well, we won't accept a pending charge. Wait till it's completed, and then you can submit the completed charge. And I thought, well, that's awfully fussy. Well, guess what? By the time the payment went through, it was 43 cents difference because there had been a change in the currency exchange. So actually they were right. This is what accounting is, I suppose, is you're looking for exact numbers, I think, or sure justification why the numbers are not exact, I would say. And sometimes those transactions were a little tricky. So for example, one of the costs was maybe like $450 that I had to pay in cash to the concierge at our hotel so that they could purchase our train tickets for us, because understandably, they wanted cash to make this purchase for us. And that was, I basically, it was hard to prove the cash exchange. It wasn't exactly the same as getting a receipt, so I basically took screenshots of the email conversations that we had, and again, that worked. So it's basically a matter of presenting enough evidence that, yes, I made the purchase, here is something that resembles a receipt for the purchase, and here is the actual, ticket or some kind of a proof that I have actually, the evidence for the fact that we are in fact going to engage with this experience or this mode of transport, or we're going to stay in this hotel. There should be something saying, yes, you are confirmed to blah, blah, blah. And the visas, each of the visas cost $25, and that's what the receipt reflects. But actually, each of the visas cost $25.67, I think, because you can see in my bank account how much each of the visas cost. But it's not the same amount that is shown on the receipt for the visas. And so I'm not sure. I just submitted that cost, and I'm not sure how the business's office is going to feel about that. It's those kind of things that it's just like, it doesn't quite, it's not quite working out. Like, you're not going to have the exact numbers. So we'll see. We'll see if that one comes back at us. It could be that these are the kinds of things that accountants, account for. Then there's some losses and there are some things that never get perfectly rectified. I'm going to guess that that's the case. I don't know a lot about accountancy. So we have the visas in hand. We have a receipt saying that we paid $25, and then we have a bank account that says I paid $25.67 for each of the visas. I'm not sure they're going to like that very much. I think they might have some issue with that, especially since there's 12 of them. I don't know. Wish me luck. It has changed. It's been interesting watching the evolution of how things are working, because 3 years ago, I would have surely said cash is king. You need cash. Even for an entire week's hotel rental, there was literally no way to pay for something with a credit card. In fact, one of the places asked me to use Western Union to send, and I think you have to use cash with Western Union. So some things are just tricky with India, but a lot of these things are evolving. Even over the last 3 years since I've been there, there's a lot more credit cards allowed. There's a lot more payment ahead of time that's allowed. I would still say it's true that cash is king for lots of things, like for restaurants, for certain excursions, of course for tips and for guides and things like that. Credit cards are being accepted more and more. So I don't love using ATMs in India. I don't actually know where an ATM is in Varanasi. And when we're in Delhi, we actually do know how to get to some banks that have ATMs, but they're kind of a far distance for us. So we try to pay for as many things as possible and then carry a small amount of cash around. And if we really need to, we can always go to an ATM. We do know where they are, but we are not, heads up to anybody trying to scam us. We are not, we're not carrying around tons and tons of cash to India. There are a few things that we have to still pay cash for, but not as many even as 3 years ago, where we had to literally carry around, a substantial amount of money in order to make the trip work. This year, we're paying ahead as much as possible for as many things as possible. For example, getting into the Taj Mahal, it costs about $18 a ticket to get into the Taj. You actually can purchase that online ahead of time, but as far as I can tell, they can only be purchased 7 days or less prior to you actually going to the Taj. So those tickets are a little limited in the way that they actually work. And then when we go to the Red Fort, it's the same thing. It's probably about $10 a ticket, and we can purchase it ahead of time, but it has to be within that 7-day window. So I kind of make a note to myself, 7 days before we are planning on going to these places, I'm going to purchase those tickets just to have fewer and fewer things that I have to pay for with cash. Yeah, and some things are just tricky to pay for ahead of time. But we do our best, like again, we need Western Union. We need tricky little ways to send cash over the internet. There's a website called Wise, which seems to be somewhat like PayPal, so we can send money that way sometimes. And there are actually a few different platforms like that I was not entirely familiar with, and it's a little bit jarring to have to trust certain systems. So we do try to be limited in that. We try to make it not too large of a cost if we're going to be using a new type of website we've never heard of before. But there are some times when you kind of have to make that decision, like this really is just the best way to go, and so let's go ahead and use this platform and hope it works out. Hey, we're coming down to it. It is less than 2 weeks until we actually leave. I can't believe it. I think my students are pretty stressed. Maybe some of them are really nervous. I'm not. I've been to India a few times now, and not that I'm an expert by any means, but I kind of know that if you have the right mindset going into it, you'll figure things out. It'll work out. And I guess for the most part, I'm just really excited. I hope everything comes off, that's for sure. I hope we get over there. I hope all 12 of us make it in, and we'll just go from there. It's going to be great. It's going to be great.